Hello everyone, it's my pleasure to be invited back to speak to the Oklahoma Association of Conservation Districts area meetings. I've spoken to this group before a long time ago, way back when Clay Pope was in charge, so it has been quite a while. This is of course different circumstances, but I'm happy to appear virtually. I've always told people it's better if they see me not in person, so there you go. My name is Gary McManus. I'm the state climatologist for Oklahoma. I work at the Oklahoma Climatological Survey and the Oklahoma Mesonet here on the campus of University of Oklahoma. I'm pausing for all the boos out there. We are on the campus of the University of Oklahoma in the National Weather Center, so we're co-associated with some of the federal programs and some of the other state programs and the School of Meteorology here at the University of Oklahoma. So I have my bachelor's and master's in meteorology at the University of Oklahoma. I started at the Oklahoma Climate Survey back in 1999, and I've moved up the ranks, basically waited for everybody else to leave, and I finally got named the state climatologist about 6 or 7 years ago. And I've been sailing along ever since. I think a lot of the information we provide from the Oklahoma Mesonet and the Oklahoma Climatological Survey are very important to the efforts of conservation folks like yourselves. We of course provide the weather data, the up to every 5 minutes worth of weather data, and that's especially important when we're dealing with things like flash flooding, fronts moving through, which can help the folks not only forecasting the weather, but also trying to fight wildfires and things of that nature. And of course, we also provide some of the information about forecasts, especially the more put out there forecasts like weekly to monthly to even seasonal forecasts. So when you start getting the longer time frames of forecasts, that's when we start to provide a little bit more of the climatological forecasts or the outlooks, and those can be important when it starts to come to planning. Now, sometimes they're not worth very much because the status of the science for those monthly to seasonal forecasts, especially when you start to go out into the next several seasons, the science just isn't there to give the most accurate outlooks in those cases, but still, the data does hold some value, especially when we start to get into the cool season with, let's say, October through April, when we're dealing with El Nino or La Nina, or the absence of both of those, which would be called neutral conditions. So a lot of that type of information is important to conservation, but certainly the weather from the Mesonet, the weather data that we provide, the rainfall when we get to the extreme rainfall events, also the winds, which are very important, and also the way we track drought with the Mesonet. We're one of the few states that can actually track drought across every county in our state up to every 5 minutes. So that's very important when it comes to conservation efforts. And we provide lots of value-added data in other areas as well with some of our drought indices that we provide, our wildfire data, and other parts of the Mesonet data that we provide. So I hope that you folks are familiar with the Mesonet data and some of our other products at the Oklahoma Climate Survey, and you'll actually get to use those. If not, just contact me. I'm pretty easy to reach at gmcmanus@mesonet.org, and I can certainly walk you through some of those products. And also, if you can find us at most agricultural gatherings, the major ones across the state, we do have co-partnered colleagues with the Oklahoma State University Department of Agriculture, not department, but the School of Agriculture that go out to those meetings and set up tables and provide that information. So always look for us when you go out to those meetings. And one of the fun things I get to do in my job is write the OCS Mesonet ticker. It's a somewhat daily, sometimes 3 days a week, sometimes 4 days a week, sometimes 5 days a week at least for the work week, email that I write that goes out to about 1,000 people across the state. It goes from individuals just out there wanting some weather information all the way up to the governor's office, to Senator Inhofe. I have all sorts of subscribers. A lot of you folks are subscribed, a lot of our emergency managers, a lot of our researchers here at the National Weather Center take this. Now, it does use a little bit of attempt of humor to give the weather and climate information for the state. My adage is, if we're not laughing about Oklahoma weather, we're often crying about it. So we might as well laugh, right? So it does use my attempts at humor. Sometimes it hits, a lot of times it misses, but it tries to, it at least tries to spice it up a little bit. I'm from Buffalo, Oklahoma, born and raised up near the Panhandle, and the weather up there is a little bit drastic, so it's often joked about up there, and that's where I learned that, I think. But if you do get that, you'll notice some things you've probably seen before, like our Brahms DEFCON meter. I put that out if we're going to get some rain or snow. It's supposed to be a little bit sarcastic, a little bit facetious, but it's really just to alert people to go search out some actual bona fide weather information when it comes to snow and ice and things that can cause you to slip and slide. So attempts like that. We do get serious when it's time to get serious, but we try and use the humor to alert people to things that they might need to pay attention to. And of course, across Oklahoma, we do have a lot of serious weather. And so, like I said, when it's time to get serious, we get serious. But until then, let's laugh it up, okay? Now, before I forget, I should tell you how you can sign up for that Mesonet ticker. And you can try it out for a little while. If you don't like it, you can sure send me an unsubscribe. All you have to do is send an email to gmcmanus@mesonet.org. That's GMCMANUS at Mesonet, MESONET.org. Or ticker at mesonet.org. And just say subscribe, and I'd like to subscribe to the ticker, and I'll get you in there. Then when you've had enough of me, you can send me an unsubscribe. And it'll hurt my feelings, and I'll cry a little while, but I'll get over it. So if you want that Mesonet ticker, be sure and send me an email. Now, we've been dealing with a lot of drought here in 2020. Of course, 2020 is going to have all sorts of weird things going on, as we've seen already, but the drought has been winding down a little bit as we've gone through the summer, oddly enough. We certainly didn't expect it to go that way. We entered summer with a pretty drastic drought developing across much of the northern half of the state, even down into southwestern parts of the state. But we did start to see a lot of relief as we got into July, especially the second half July. It's not something we were really looking for. So when we looked at the outlooks during that time frame, we were seeing lots of drought being expected to develop and intensify. But actually it went a little bit in reverse. So, like I said, sometimes those outlooks, they're really a little bit shaky. But one thing we're looking at that we might need to pay attention to, like I said, is when we start to see in the cool season, La Nina or El Nino start to develop. That's the cooling or the warming of the sea surface temperatures in the equatorial Pacific down there off the west coast of South America. What we're seeing in the models and the forecast output for that area would be a cooling of the waters down in that area, which would signal La Nina. Now, La Nina can bring us a little bit unfavorable weather when we get to the cool season. So again, let's talk to October through March or April time frame. It can tend to bring us a little bit warmer than normal and drier than normal weather for that period. So that can lead us into drought if we are a little bit drier, a little bit warmer during that time frame. Of course, the drought and the heat go hand in hand. So if we don't get those replenishing snowstorms and rainstorms during the winter, when the demand is a lot lower because of the cooler temperatures and a lot of the vegetation is dormant, it will set us up for a little bit of a more risky situation when it comes to that drought. If you remember back the drastic drought from 2010, late 2010 through spring of 2015, that started with a very strong La Nina. So it's one thing we're going to have to keep our eye on, because the model output does favor a La Nina. Now, right now, we're not sure if it favors a strong, moderate, or weak La Nina. So obviously, if we have a weaker La Nina, it's not quite as impactful for our part of the country. But if we do have a moderate to strong La Nina, it's something we do need to look out for. And also, especially when we get into that early spring, late winter, early spring fire season, which can impact a lot of the agricultural community and the conservation community. If you lose that vegetation on the land, that can set you up for some bad erosion problems. We get those rainstorms later on, so that does matter. So when we start to look at the future here over the next few months into the winter season, as we go through early fall, through the winter, and into early spring, we will be watching that La Nina forecast and see if it changes. The Climate Prediction Center, which is a division of the National Weather Service, does have a La Nina watch out for this coming fall through the winter. So we will keep an eye on that for you. Now, one of the things that shaped my role as a climatologist is where I grew up. And as I said, I grew up near Buffalo, out close to the Panhandle. We like to call ourselves the bolt that holds the Panhandle on. When I was growing up, we were just out of the range of the Oklahoma City television station radars, so we'd always have to rely on Dodge City or Amarillo, so we didn't really feel like we were part of what we call downstate. We were more attuned with the folks out in the Panhandle. But the Panhandle is what we think about when we talk about the Dust Bowl, and also far western Oklahoma. It was really a high plains drought. I know people across Oklahoma say, well, I grew up in the Dust Bowl, but the actual Dust Bowl, the place where the greatest soil erosion occurred, was out across the high plains. So the westernmost counties of the main body of the state, and also, of course, the Panhandle, and we get into the panhandles of Texas, and then we go up into southwest Kansas, western Kansas, western Nebraska, eastern Colorado, New Mexico. So that area is where the prime erosion occurred for the Dust Bowl. And I grew up listening to my relatives talk about growing up in the actual Dust Bowl area. Now, as usually is the case, as a young person, I really wish now that I had listened more intently to those stories that my relatives were telling me. Back then, you wanted to go outside and play. You wanted to go fishing. You wanted to go ride bikes with your friends. You didn't want to sit there and listen to the old people talk. But now that I'm the old people, I'm certainly more attuned to that lore that was being spread about the Dust Bowl. So if I studied the Dust Bowl, some of the major things I've learned was really for Oklahoma. We were set up for the Dust Bowl by lots of rainfall previous to the Dust Bowl. It caused us to start growing more and more crops, start growing wheat actually, and starting to plow up more and more of the land. And by the time the droughts came in the summer of 1931, well, we had basically the entire High Plains plowed up, just waiting for the drought and waiting for the wind. That's exactly what happened. All that grass that Mother Nature had put there to hold that soil down simply went away. So a lot of that's due to, unfortunately, agricultural practices at the time. They didn't worry about conservation. The lessons learned during the 1930s drought, the Dust Bowl drought, is what saved us as we got into the droughts of the 1950s and the most recent horrible drought we had, 2010 through 2015. We didn't have the huge dust storms. Yeah, we had some dust blowing. In the 50s had some pretty bad dust storms, but not an entire portion of a continent blowing away, blowing across the eastern seaboard and over into Europe and other parts of the world. So that was the difference. That's the difference that the conservation practices learned, and the practices that are being continued by you folks, being taught to people in the agricultural community and other sectors of society. Those conservation practices are what saves the soil. They save the soil. It's a very important part of what we've learned in our part of the world. And so what you do is invaluable to all sectors of our society here in Oklahoma. Now, one of the most important aspects of my job I've discovered over the last decade is tracking drought. The U.S. Drought Monitor relies on local expertise, and for us, I'm basically it. So I go out and ask people about drought. I solicit drought input from our county offices, from our state offices, from individual farmers in individual counties. So if I need some information, I first go to the county offices, and then they put me in contact with the people in different parts of the county. I take all that information, including mesonet data, data that's used for drought indices. So the data from the drought indices, different satellite indicators like vegetative health index, even the fire danger model that we have here at the mesonet. I use that data. I try and coalesce that into an observation for Oklahoma, a snapshot in time by Tuesday morning into Wednesday. I send that into the national author with what I have discovered to be our general look at what we're looking at here in Oklahoma for drought. And then we haggle back and forth. It's a give and take. The national author has their they have their certain things they like to look at, but I tend to go by impacts. I know that we can look at all the data and indices that we want to, those drought indices, but I really want to know what's happening on the ground, because that impacts people where they live, and some of the aid that's triggered by the U.S. Drought Monitor. It's very important to know what's happening on the ground, and that's where we'll sort of run afoul sometimes of the actual process of the Drought Monitor week to week, especially when I start doing the border areas with other states, Colorado, Kansas, Texas, New Mexico. Generally across western Oklahoma, we have a lot of difficulty sometimes trying to come to a consensus amongst the different states. So that's one of the things I do that's most important in my job. And when it gets really bad like this summer, it can take up a quarter to 30% of my time. So I certainly appreciate any drought information I can get from folks, especially the county level agents like you guys. One of the toughest things about the drought picture in Oklahoma is forecasting drought. So, like I said, take this summer, for instance. We had a pretty severe drought heading into the summer months when it's supposed to get really dry and really hot, and drought can really explode at that time. Now, it did explode in May and June, but as we went into July, we were sounding the alarm bells because it looked like drought was going to take off. And what happens? We end up with one of our wettest Julys on record, at least across north central Oklahoma, out over through parts of the northeast, parts of west central Oklahoma. So there you go. When we try and forecast drought, Mother Nature makes us look like a fool. And, meteorologists are famous for looking like a fool. That's why I went into climatology. Now I'm stuck with it, trying to forecast drought instead of the weather. So drought is just very difficult to mitigate against. We can say, there might be a drought coming. You might want to do this, so you sell off some cattle. You do other things to mitigate the impacts of drought. And then you get record rainfall. So sometimes it works that way, sometimes it doesn't. When we're forecasting drought, we're now saying with the La Nina possibly showing up this winter, we're saying this is something to take a look at and wait and see what happens as we get closer. So as we get closer and closer, maybe we get a better picture. But you can't rule out these extreme events either that can put the forecast on its ear. So suppose we're going into December and we're saying it's going to be really dry and warm in December, and then you get a 15 to 20 inch snowfall, which has happened before. That place is going to be in good shape wherever that happened. Other parts of the state might not be in good shape. So it's really just a catch-all of trying to look at the impacts, look at what the best available science is showing for the outlooks, and then trying to piece that together and using your best experience with Oklahoma weather as you've grown up and experienced Oklahoma weather. But the one thing you always know is Oklahoma weather is unpredictable no matter what time of the year it is. Well, that's it for me. I want to thank you again for having me speak at your meeting. Thanks to Brian Painter for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to talk to you folks. And like I said, if you want to take a look at the ticker, go to ticker.mesonet.org. Check it out. If that doesn't scare you away, send me an email, and we'll get you on the ticker list. And for sure, if you see something on the U.S. Drought Monitor picture for Oklahoma that you don't like or you think is wrong, contact me immediately, and we can try and get that changed over to where it looks a little bit more like reality in your little part of the country. So always welcome that input anytime. And again, I thank you so much for having me, and hope you have a good rest of the day.